Thank you very much. I'm also very pleased to have this opportunity to reconnect with UNESCO. I haven't had a close connection over quite a few years now. So I'm grateful to Nada Alasan for inviting me. And I'm very pleased to be going after Carlotta and Mohit because it very much fits with my perspective, which I summarized the sort of perspective in a book called Ancient Futures. And of course, I think what Carlotta and Mohit were talking about is the absolutely essential need to protect ancient local knowledge systems and practices into the future. What's happening is that we're sort of leveling, as we've of course seen with heritage buildings until relatively recently, they were just destroyed to be replaced by cement boxes using lots of embodied energy and fossil fuels. I'm going to be providing a very broad perspective. The title of my talk is not quite appropriate. I want to give a broader picture. My case study is a place called Ladakh. Sorry, I don't have a PowerPoint here, but Ladakh is a very beautiful place. It's the westernmost part of the Tibetan Plateau. And I arrived there in 1975 at the age of 29. And this experience of being in Ladakh in 1975 completely changed my life. So my life is sort of before Ladakh and after Ladakh. Ladakh was, at the time I arrived, sealed off from the outside world. And it was a part of the world that hadn't been colonized. And it had not been developed. I found people there who were happier than any people I had ever encountered. Of course, in the beginning, I couldn't say they were really happy, but they were incredibly vital, and it was a joie de vivre that I found astounding. I also found it astounding that I had beautiful large houses. There was no sign of poverty, no hunger, unemployment didn't exist. And I had come out as part of the film team. I was going to be there for 6 weeks, but I became so fascinated, fell so much in love with Ladakh that I gave up my job in Paris and stayed. And in effect, I've stayed for now 38 years. And in seeing changes in one little place on the Tibetan Plateau, actually not so little, it's about the size of Austria, but with about 100 villages spread out in the desert. In seeing the changes there over the last 38 years, I believe I have a very valuable case study that can shed light on where we're going today and why things are going so wrong. I think we have to look at a much bigger picture to see why we're losing biodiversity in this incredibly, cataclysmic way so rapidly. Why do we have so much violence? And as we've been told earlier, the violence now is much more internal. We have so much friction within countries. We haven't had a world war for a while, but we do have internal friction. And so in Ladakh, I feel I was in a place where I was forced to see the connections. It was a small place, and I became witness to the psychological as well as structural pressures on people that destroyed self-respect and self-reliance. And I believe that this is happening primarily because we are not seeing the bigger system that we end up supporting. What happened in Ladakh was, I should also add that of course Ladakh wasn't a perfect paradise. The infant mortality was very high. However, health, and as I say, there was no hunger, so generally health was extremely good, physical health. Neither was there obesity nor hunger. And the status of women was high. It was a very peaceful culture where Buddhists, Muslims, and a small number of Christians had lived side by side for generations without conflict. So what I saw changing was that through development, suddenly, as the roads were bringing in products from the outside world, that had been sealed off for political reasons. So this hadn't happened before, and when it happened fairly rapidly. Suddenly products from the other side of the Himalayas came into the local capital, selling for less than local products. So I saw how butter that had been transported for 6 days cost less, in fact half as much as local butter. As part of the process of development, we also saw building materials transported in over the Himalayan mountains with incredible amounts of embodied energy, as well as all of that energy in transporting it, selling at prices that made the local traditional skills and labor and the local materials too expensive by comparison. Over the years, I ended up studying this phenomenon worldwide. So I found that in Mongolia, where they had 20 million milk-producing animals, you couldn't afford local dairy nor butter. It was from Germany. In Kenya, I found in Nairobi, butter from Holland costing half as much as Kenyan butter. In England, butter from New Zealand cost a third of butter from the farm down the road. Now, as I started studying this from a global point of view, it became obvious that what's happening is that our economic system, our adherence to believing that supporting the global market and global trade is leading to endemic subsidies, taxes, and regulations favoring global trade over local trade. So I hope that some of you will be interested in this theme, because from my perspective, this preferencing is actually preferencing monopolies, global monopolies that get an unfair advantage over local players. The key elements in the economic system that lead to this have also to do with education. The educational system that is being promoted worldwide is actually training children for knowledge in a very scarce number of resources from the global market. So in Ladakh, it was very extreme, to see children who had learned how to build out of mud these houses that do much better in disaster areas, using local materials and local adaptation that was so extreme that it varied from region to region and village to village within Ladakh. That adaptation to the specifics of the living natural environment, that's what local knowledge systems were about and how children were educated. As they were now educated in the modern sense, they were put in a cement box, often without windows. They learned nothing about local materials, local skills. They learned nothing about how to work with yaks that grazed at 17,000 feet or vast areas. Instead, if they learned about architecture, engineering, food production, it was not during the earlier years, it was when they went off to college, to an agricultural college, an engineering college. And there they learned about a few hybrid seeds and a few species of animals. So the agricultural experts were bringing in Jersey cows to Ladakh. Now Jersey cows could not even go to the grazing lands. It wasn't possible for them. They had to be kept at a lower elevation, and they had to be fed with imported, industrially produced pellets. This is just one example of how we really have to rethink education urgently, as well as the subsidies for a centralizing infrastructure. All the resources were put in the capital city. The first was a diesel generator, later on a giant dam, but it all fueled urbanization, urban development. I believe that we could, today we have almost still half the global population in more rural economies. We could shift the development model towards a decentralized model where there will be a balance between smaller cities and the land, between local knowledge systems and knowledge about other parts of the world. I'm not advocating a decentralized or localized development that cuts us off from the outside world. Today, I believe that the only hope for maintaining true cultural self-respect and diversity is through a deeper dialogue between the global north and the global south, between Islam and Christianity, between East and West. We urgently need a deeper dialogue, and UNESCO is one of the best vehicles for that, and to a great extent that's what's happening. But I think we also need to talk about this system, the market, that is driving us in the opposite direction of what we're talking about. I think it's very helpful to have clarity about that. And the clarity will include seeing that education, what type of energy and technology, and who generates money, who has the right to make money. These are the four key pillars of an economic system right now. Education, which is a training for a particular type of economy and life. What type of energy? Is it going to be centralized, fossil fuel, nuclear power, giant dams, or could it be decentralized? And what types of technologies? Those are the ingredients of an economic system that we need to look at and change towards decentralization. What we could see when we do decentralize is an amazing win-win situation. We have shown, by helping to start a local food movement, that farmers who are helped to market locally actually get a market stimulation to diversify. Diversity is an economic priority when you sell closer to home. When you're a farmer stuck in a market where the national government believes that the best way to grow the economy is by supporting global trade, the pressure is to merge or die, become bigger and more monocultural, or you can't survive. And monoculture extends not only to a few species, but it extends to the size of your product. It's got to fit the machinery, the harvesting machinery, the machinery that washes it, the machinery that packs it for the supermarket shelves. In that long-distance food system, we are losing so much, not only in the terms of biodiversity, which is what Carlotta said, it's life itself. Diversity is a principle of life, but we are losing massive amounts of energy that go into machinery that's replacing people who, in shorter supply chains, actually have enjoyable work. So we really must think about looking at the new farmers movement, which now in America has led to, for the first time in a century, there are more farmers in America. For a century, the number has been going down, 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 as you have to merge and get bigger and bigger or die, use more and more energy, more and more technology, more and more debt or die. Now there's a new farmers movement with young people who enjoy farming because they're working as part of a diversified farm that sells closer to home, closer to the city. This local food movement, very close to the slow food movement, is actually beginning to show micro-trend away from the disastrous direction we're talking about. I have been helping to stimulate these things, and in Japan it's also taken the form of a different form of fishery, again, smaller scale, allowing for diversity, not using giant drift nets for a global market, destroying the life of the seas in just one big drift net. Smaller scale, more intimate knowledge, more labor. So shifting the taxes that at the moment favor every business to use more energy and technology and punish them when they employ people. That's what the tax system is doing now. Shifting that, taking it away from labor, putting it on energy and resources, will transform the economy overnight towards biodiversity, towards a better balance between urban and rural. So my limited references to urbanization and architecture then are part of this path. On the one hand, using more fossil fuels, embodied energy, a globalizing market, towards adapting local knowledge systems, nurturing them where they exist, and re-establishing them where they've been lost. The local knowledge systems are coming back in the form of movements like permaculture and the global eco-village movement. These are young people who are now re-indigenizing their knowledge and even their lives. I believe that if we also transmit that knowledge to places like China and India, there can be a very exciting intercultural dialogue about how we can together nurture diversity, cultural self-respect, which of course is intimately linked to personal self-respect. And I'd actually like to finish by introducing that element of personal self-respect. Perhaps what makes me more passionate than anything about this work is that in Lagak, I saw and experienced, I learned to speak the language fluently in the first year. And I found that people had such a high sense of self-esteem that the self wasn't an issue. There wasn't a need to say, oh, I'm great, I'm very important. There was this relaxed sense of self. I saw how in a very short period, with the help of tourism and the media, young people got the impression that everything about their life was backward and primitive. Very quickly, the imagery in the media and what they were taught at school led them to believe that rural life, essentially any life that wasn't white Western consumer culture, was inferior. And it led to such a terrible self-rejection. Young people telling me, oh, it's much better to be tall and to have a nose like you do, a big nose, and to have eyes like you do. And as I talk more to young people, I realized that the effect of development had been to make them feel that everything about their own culture, everything, their food, their language, the way they look, every aspect was wrong. They had to emulate some distant model of what they thought was perfection, what they thought was superior. Part of that model is urban. It's urban. You've got to go to the city and you've got to look like a Westerner. And if you don't have the right label, you're nobody. As children, in the now monocultural situation in schools, ended up competing with each other, what they were really doing was thinking that if they had the Nike running shoes on them, if they had the right blue jeans, they would get the love and the respect that they longed for. What we have today is a system that has managed to pervert a truly universal human need, particularly young, to be loved and respected. We long for connection, love, and respect. We need that. That's how we evolved. This system now is pitting child against child in a monoculture, the same age, cut off from intergenerational connections, competing to be the perfect role model for high energy, high consumption consumer culture. So for me, what we're talking about is an economics of happiness. An economics that allows every human being to feel that who they are, whatever their skin color, whatever their language, whatever that diversity, that unique individualism as well as cultural identity, is perfect the way it is. In order to make that possible, we must look at this need to decentralize structurally, And that means also the energy systems, it means supporting local economies. Part of the whole package where we need to go, the diversity, also includes intergenerational deep connections. As we all know, in the Western world, those connections are being cut off. We're under intense time pressure. We barely have time to know ourselves, much less our elders and the link between young and old. So there is a structural path that actually supports the intergenerational connections. Even now, in the modern farmers' market in the West, I mentioned this yesterday, we are seeing that within the heart of the Western fast-paced, very, very pressured life, the farmers' market shows a little example of what happens through localizing economically. People at the farmers' market actually engage in an intergenerational way. They take more time. We have discovered that on the average they have 10 times more conversations with each other than they do in the supermarket, where they rush in and rush out, and the whole experience is rather unpleasant. And this, I haven't even touched on the quality of the food in the supermarket versus the quality of the food in the farmers' market, the health epidemic, the obesity epidemic in the more industrialized parts of the world, with trans fat, high fructose corn syrup, all to do with shelf life and long distances. So long distances do not serve us. I call the long distance economy the drone economy. Our arms have grown so long we can't see what our hands are doing. As we shorten supply links and reconnect producers and consumers, we start building more human-scale systems that are the economics of happiness. Thank you.